and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we're releasing a special episode with all of our favorite podcasting moments from the year 2024. This has now become a tradition as we started this in 2022 and did this again last year in 2023. As always, it's so very difficult to try to determine which episodes we're going to feature here, which clips we're going to use. So many amazing episodes that we were able to do. It's a bit like trying to choose your favorite child, but we were able to narrow this down. Hopefully this one isn't too long. As you well know, I really suck at keeping things very brief, so this will be a long episode. And I just want to start out by saying thank you so very much for you, the listener, and thank you for everybody who took the time to appear on our show. We had absolutely amazing guests, like I said, made it very difficult for me to determine which ones we'd be featuring on this episode. As always, I'll be playing the clip. I'll give you a brief introduction of each clip. I'm probably not going to go into too much detail there, just to say that I'll tell you which episode the clip came from so that you can go back and listen to the full episode if you like. That way you get more of the exact context of the message from some of our guests in whatever topic you're really most interested in. Before we get to that, a few stats like we did last time. I just wanted to read out that we were able to achieve 143,000 plus downloads this year, which is amazing, all over the world. I think I saw that London was our top downloaded city, so that's quite cool. We also released 184 new episodes this year. Our largest downloaded episode was one that we did in January called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, with the incredible Dr. Georgia Ede. That was a fantastic episode. That was episode 584, so go back and check that out for sure. In the past, when I've done this episode, I've tried to come up with different themes. The first year that we did this in 2022, most of the top downloaded episodes were all about low carbohydrate nutrition, so we really focused on that. Last year, we still had a lot of focus on low carbohydrate and ketogenic nutrition, but the focus was even a little bit more on the carnivore diet in particular. So that was our focus last year. This year, there's a few different themes that I wanted to bring up. It's interesting to see the rise of certain new, I guess, kind of like education in new and emerging fields like metabolic psychiatry is really on the come up, which is quite interesting. Again, that's not something that's new, but something that's been talked about a lot more. We had really interesting conversations this year all about type 1 diabetes as well, and some other themes that I will be introducing in this episode. So as always, thank you again for listening. I hope you really enjoy this. And like I said before, go back and check out the full interviews if you want to dive in to one of these clips that you're interested in and get the full context and everything. We already mentioned Dr. Georgia Ede, and that is where we are going to start. We're going to start out with some experts in different fields, and I'm going to start out with people who we were able to host for the first time in 2024. And Dr. Georgia Ede was one of those. Like I said earlier, this was the top downloaded episode that we did all year. This episode is called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind with Dr. Georgia Ede. That was episode 584, which was released on January 31st, 2024. As part of our podcasting journey, we've got to talk to some of the most amazing mental health people in the world. Dr. Chris Palmer, Rachel Brown. We talked to Brett Scher, who's a cardiologist, ironically, but also is big into mental health. Mutual friend Nicole Laurent, we've talked to a few times, Allie Houston, and all of them have their own personal stories, and they're also experts. And it's really great to chat with them. It's great to chat with you about that stuff. When I started the podcast, I also wanted to capture stories of normal people. And one of my favorite recent ones was a woman who we highlighted about a month ago. She was in Hal Cranmer's assisted living facility, which I think you're familiar with in Arizona, where he's putting assisted living, patients on low carbohydrate and, if they want to, carnivore diets. And this woman that appeared on the show with us is 70 years old, entered the facility, scoring a 14 out of 30 on, I can't remember what test it is, but showing moderate to severe dementia. And when we were talking to her, she had already scored a 2 and had left the facility, was working to be a health coach, is volunteering at a hospital. I'm talking to this 70-year-old woman who is totally alert and is following the conversation perfectly. It's just so different to sit in front of somebody and say what, numbers and studies and research. This is a human who has completely reversed the direction in their life. Is so inspiring. What was it like in practice to see people truly transform?
It's, it still takes me by surprise every time. It's still inspiring. It's still exciting because each story is so unique. And the words that people use to describe their experiences are so unique. And so I'm always on the edge of my seat, with every patient. It's really fun. It's really fun to work this way. And it's a completely different it's a different way of practicing. When you're prescribing medicines all day long, or even if you're doing psychotherapy. I did a lot of psychotherapy, and I still use medicines and psychotherapy in my work. There's still a place for both of those things. But when you're practicing conventionally, it feels like kind of a top down, kind of a that there's kind of an imbalance in the power dynamic, and there is very much I've got the information, I've got the expertise, and here's what I think you should do, and here's why I think you should do it. There is that kind of traditional doctor-patient dynamic that can sometimes still creep into the room. But with practicing this way, I mean, I can't change your diet for you, right? So you have to be a partner in it. And in fact, you have to actually take the lead. I mean, I can give you the information, and I can, try to motivate you or identify your own motivations. But you're the one who will actually be doing, actually taking the lead on it. And there's some wonderful things about that. And one is that when you feel better, and in most cases you will, if you stick with it for a few weeks, and most people do feel better, you're going to have such a sense of pride and accomplishment because you did that. And so you took control of your mental health. I didn't do it. So, and it also, it doesn't create that same sense of dependency on the doctor. In fact, most of my patients, eventually leave the practice because they're better. And that's very different from conventional psychiatry. And most psychiatry practices, including my own for many, many years, I mean, this is really hard to say, but most of our practices were just filling up with patients that weren't getting better.
Yeah.
And so that, it doesn't take long before psychiatrists have a practice full of patients who are not getting better, and they can't take on any new ones. They can't help anybody new. So they're just writing refills and providing support, and that's all well and good. But when you practice this way, most people improve to the extent that they don't need to keep seeing you.
Yeah.
And that's real healing.
That's incredible. And you've kind of alluded to it, and that kind of tells me almost everything I need to know. But I am going to steal this question from Allie Houston. He asked you when you were on his podcast. I love the question. What would be a win before you knew nutrition could help somebody, when you were just using the tools that you were trained in? And what would be an example of a win after using nutrition as well? Again, I think you've kind of already alluded to it, but I love the question. I love the answer.
Allie's great. And it is a great question. So, before, when I practiced conventionally, a win would be, say, for example, I had somebody with a serious mental illness, especially somebody with a psychotic illness. And I can think of hundreds of people. This story would apply to hundreds of people over the years. Say I had somebody with a serious mental illness, like bipolar disorder or a psychosis. Those particular disorders, depending on where the person was at in their illness, if they were in a manic state, let's say they have bipolar disorder, bipolar illness, and they're in a manic phase, the manic phase is often accompanied by very poor insight into the illness. And so it's usually during a manic phase when people will stop medication, or they will not agree that there is an issue to be dealt with, or that there is anything wrong. And the same is often, of course, true of people with psychosis, is that there can be very poor insight into not only the events that are going on around them and with the people around them, a different view of reality, but also poor insight into the fact that there is something wrong that needs treatment. And so, again, that person may be difficult to convince, say, to try a medication or to stay on a medication. So a win back then would always feel like a win when I was somehow able to convince somebody who really needed help that they needed help, and that in a way that they would accept. That was a real challenge. And it still is, of course, in psychiatry. I still work with patients with poor insight, and I still work with patients who don't think anything is wrong, and who don't want to change their diet. But back then, it really was; those were the most challenging cases, and because those cases were very, very high risk. These were people who often were suicidal or were not in control of their behaviors and could, make some very risky decisions and put themselves at risk or their families at risk or others at risk. So that would always feel like a win. Now, what feels like a win, and I'll give an example. I've been working with a gentleman for I think almost 4 years now, who has had a really, really hard time um, staying on a low carbohydrate diet and maintaining weight loss and keeping blood sugars in control. And somebody with type 2 diabetes and who's already lost 100 pounds and for the most part kept it off with a lot of kind of ups and downs, slipping off the diet, going back on the diet. And this is pretty common with low carb diets, and just a lot of difficulty, largely because of some food addiction issues, which are very, very common. So anyway, working together and trying to get him back on track whenever when he would stray from the diet or the diet would get interrupted. So some fits and starts, and 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing, right? So this was going on for a couple of years, the past couple of years. He did really well in the beginning, and then it just kind of, started to fray at the edges. A win now is him finally agreeing to try a carnivore diet, which I had been recommending whenever he would come and say, "This is really hard. I'm hungry all the time. I want a snack. I'm my weight is going up and down. I'm thinking about food all the time, especially when I'm stressed or I'm not feeling physically well. I reach for a food that was not on my diet." So I recommended a carnivore a number of times as a reset. And finally, he said, "Well, I've tried everything else. This clearly isn't working. Let me give it a try." So, within 2 weeks, he's feeling so much better. The blood sugars are coming down beautifully. They're so stable. I follow them he uses a glucose monitor. I follow the glucose readings. And it's just a beautiful experience to watch that glucose, which is high and going up and down and going up, 150, 180, 200, 300, and it comes right down, into 110, 120, 190. He never had blood sugars in that range on a low carbohydrate diet. And he said to me, and it struck me, it really stuck with me what he said, because I know him really well. I've been working with him for a long time. And he's the same age as I am, right? And so he said, for the first time in 60 years, I feel full when I eat. And that's a brand new experience for me. And I just, for somebody like that who has been just white knuckling it on a low carbohydrate diet, he doesn't need that willpower. He doesn't need that willpower anymore, because the diet regulates his appetite and his blood sugars and his mood and his concentration and his energy levels. He's got less pain. His breathing is better. His outlook is better. He gets more work done. And he is very surprised at how easy it is. Somebody with that history, so many of us, and I include myself in this group, you have no idea how much easier it can be if you eat what gives your body the right signals. You shouldn't have to be fighting like that every single day to try to eat properly.
Our next clip is taken from episode 672, an episode titled Dark Calories with vegetable oil expert Dr. Kate Shanahan. Like I said, she was somebody that we were able to host for the first time in 2024, which is a huge honor for me. I followed her work for a very, very long time. Her latest book, Dark Calories, is absolutely amazing, and I really think you'll like that clip from this episode, which again was episode 672, released on July 15th, 2024. I change my mind about this probably every 30 seconds. If you were to ask me, as I've been studying nutrition, I'll probably change my mind about this again every 30 seconds. It's interesting to ask seed oil experts which is worse, vegetable oil or carbohydrate. I go around and travel to low carb Denver. And when I ask Dr. Chris Kenobi and when I ask, Tucker Goodrich and all of your mutual friends who study seed oils, I always ask them, why am I traveling to low carb Denver and not low seed oil Denver? What is worse, carbohydrates and sugar or seed oils?
Well, it's definitely the vegetable oils, vegetable seed oils. And I didn't know that when I first wrote Deep Nutrition. So the first edition of Deep Nutrition came out in 2009, and I gave sugar and vegetable oil kind of like equal weight. People were asking me the same question, like, which is worse? And I'm like, I don't think they're both really bad. But then as I learned more and I, kept digging into, I kept asking myself questions, what is causing disease? What is the root cause of obesity? What is the root cause of these inflammatory disorders? And I kept finding oxidative stress as the root cause. And that's a chemical term for a type of pathology that damages cells and kills them. And it's found in evidence for oxidative stress being a causative agent of disease is found across every disease that has been studied. When pathologists, study tissues of people who had any sort of dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, you name it, multiple sclerosis, it's not dementia, but other neurologic disorders, they see evidence of oxidative stress. They see basically oxidized proteins, oxidized fats, oxidized just junk in the cell. And so there's just continually more and more evidence that oxidative stress is really the root cause of more diseases and oxidative stress is driven by vegetable oil. Whereas the sugar toxicity is called glycation. And oxidative stress drives glycation, but glycation is not involved in quite as many disorders. And sugar consumption will spike your blood sugar temporarily and cause glycation. That's why sugar's bad. So I think maybe we should talk about that a little bit, like talk about oxidative stress versus glycation.
Love it.
Because that's really the battle. That's the battle, right?
I love it.
Which one's worse?
Yeah, I love it. And I just did a seminar all about cholesterol, and we talked about the things that damage the epithelial lining as an example. But let's talk about the difference between glycation and oxidation, how those are different, and how seed oils and vegetable oils drive that process.
Yeah, so sugar is sticky. And when you feel the tackiness of something like jelly or dried juices or something, you feel the tackiness of something that's sugary on your skin, you're actually feeling those bonds breaking. So the glycation is a bond that has formed between a sugar molecule and an amino acid. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. That's what your skin is made out of. So you're actually, that tackiness is those little bonds breaking. And so you can feel glycation, which I think is really cool. So that's just a high level. What is glycation? Now, why is it bad? Well, your joints, for example, need to be very lubricated, right? But sugar is sticky. It's kind of the opposite of lubrication. So I've described it as kind of like a rusting process for your connective tissues. It's unlike a bicycle chain, which kind of when it's rusted, you got to, throw it out. Well, our body's tissues, they can clean up some of that damaged area. They have like what's called RAGE receptors for receptors for advanced glycation end products on the surface of the cell. They can actually clean up areas of the cell that have been harmed by sugar. So like people have told me that they have a lot of candy or sugar or anything that spikes their blood sugar. The next day, they often wake up where they feel it in their fingers or their knees or their ankles, their joints. And it lasts for a couple of days. Well, it doesn't last forever because the body can repair that stuff. So that's like one example of what glycation does. And what is it? Now let's talk about oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is also damages cell membranes and damages our cells. But we don't feel it so much as like a stickiness. What we feel is inflammation when our bodies are undergoing an acute episode of oxidative stress. That'll happen anytime. It can happen in normal life, right? Oxidative stress is part of normal life, but we have to be able to control it. And when you look at the time frame that these reactions occur of glycation from sugar or oxidative stress from, a diet that promotes oxidative stress, mostly rich in vegetable oils, oxidative stress destroys large bunches of molecules. It can destroy like 1 billion molecules per second. And each one of those damaged and destroyed molecules has the potential to become a catalyst for another destructive reaction. So it's basically like an explosion, a miniature explosion. So just on the time scale alone, oxidative stress is more of a threat to our health because glycation occurs over periods of seconds to minutes to hours. An interesting little fact about glycation. I mean, glycation occurs in food too, right? Did you know that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a browning reaction.
Yep.
We call it a
Maillard reaction. Yep.
Right. So things get brown. So the same thing happens in our collagen. You can take collagen from a newborn and it'll be pearly white. You can take collagen from a 90-year-old and it'll look like toast. It'll be the color of toast. But it takes decades. Right? It takes decades. But oxidative stress can destroy tissues in much, much quicker time frame. The whole purpose of an inflammatory reaction, oxidative stress triggers inflammatory reactions. And it has to be quick because when we puncture, an artery or capillary, we got to clot that blood really quick so we don't bleed to death. Right. So oxidative stress is on a fast time scale, and our body capitalizes on that when it drives inflammation reactions on purpose to solve the problem. And it can change the way your body looks in a matter of minutes. If you sprain your ankle and it swells up the size of a grapefruit, that's oxidative stress driving an inflammatory reaction. You just don't see glycation doing stuff that quickly. So that's why, that's just one reason why I think it's worse. There are several others.
Yeah. This next clip is taken from episode 738, and this episode was titled, My Child Was Diagnosed with Type 1 Diabetes, Now What? With Artie Dykman, PhD. This episode was released on November 27th, 2024. Like I said in the introduction, Type 1 diabetes has been a huge focus of our podcast this year. We hosted several guests talking about Type 1 diabetes, and Artie was generous enough to give me extra time. This episode was almost 2 hours long in length when we recorded the original one. Such an amazing guide for parents out there wondering what to do and how to manage their child's type 1 diabetes. We go into great detail on that episode, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend you check that out if type 1 diabetes is something that affects you in your personal life. He does a great job explaining things and breaking things down. That would be my first question as a parent is, okay, well, first of all, I don't know what carbohydrates are. And second of all, if that's what carbohydrates are, well, all his friends are eating it. I don't want my kid on some weirdo diet where he can't go be normal with his kid. You just told me I could take insulin when I ate that. Why do I have to worry about carbohydrate?
Okay, man, we're diving in, right? But let me back up a little bit because, the endocrinologist gives you that little cursory talk, right? And this feeds right into what you're saying. And you're going to get your scripts from your endocrinologist, and you're going to get your appointment set from your endocrinologist because you're going to check in early, right? And often before you kind of wean yourself to, every 6 months or something. But the next person that you're going to meet is maybe the hospital dietitian or maybe the endocrinologist dietitian. The endocrinologists typically kick that can over to somebody else. And the vast majority of people that meet with a dietitian describe their experience as meeting someone who typically is in very poor shape themselves, and preaches the standard food pyramid diet. So they'll give you like mimeographs. The mimeographs look like they're from the 1970s with menus on them. And so for breakfast, you might have something like an oatmeal, a skim milk, half a banana. For lunch, you might have turkey. Okay, so these are, the theme here is like Weight Watchers type 19. Like if you're old like me and your parents had a Reader's Digest magazine and there was articles about food, like low fat diet, right? So it's always like juice, lean meats. For some reason, salmon is always salmon and broccoli. So it's this super unpalatable, low fat diet that they're putting kids on. And if you're not eating any dietary fat, what are you going to eat for calories? Kids need calories. So necessarily they eat calories. And here's the problem with that. The problem is that for people without type 1 diabetes, that diet, we now know, has resulted in the type 2 diabetes epidemic and the obesity crisis. And we can get into that later. But what about people with type 1? People with type 1 have to inject insulin to cover the meals that they eat. One thing that you're told early on, which is one of the myths that you have to get over that we discussed earlier, and we're going to bring these myths up all over again. One of the myths you're told is fundamental to the structure of the standard model of type 1 diabetes treatment, which is carb counting. Simply put, you have to add up the amount of carbohydrate you have to eat, you're going to eat, and then you somehow determine by grams, okay, how much insulin. And the idea is that if you have skill at doing this task, you should be able to match the two things up and your blood sugar should stay flat. Okay, so that's the method. So there's a couple of things that are interesting there. First of all, we're going to go back to Dave's initial comment, which is why I just won't eat carbohydrate. So what's going to happen if we follow Dave's method? Like, what if Dave just eats a steak for lunch? Would he take any insulin? The standard model of carbohydrate counting would say, no, he wouldn't require insulin. But that's wrong. We know that protein requires insulin to properly metabolize. It does in non-diabetics and it does in type 1 diabetics. That's sort of a fundamental point of Bernstein's book. So right off the bat, the standard model is an invalid or at best an approximation. The next point that you have to consider is how my pancreas is going to work in a much different way than injected insulin. When I inject insulin, it's going to go into my system and do its thing and bring blood sugar down. My pancreas, the beta cells in the pancreas that secrete insulin, they're constantly, because they're glucose sensitive, they're constantly measuring your blood sugar and giving the requisite amount of insulin, secreting it to keep the blood sugar in check. So you have a feedback mechanism as a non-diabetic to cover these foods. But what happens if I'm eating a big load of carbohydrate and I take some insulin and I've miscalculated because I'm not smart enough? I'm saying that sarcastically. What will happen is I will have a hypoglycemia event. And so the question then is, does this method that they're teaching you work? Can you get good at it? Can you live a life where you end up with no complications of diabetes, no effect on your total lifespan, and you live a relatively normal life except for the inconvenience of injecting insulin and eating, food that you can measure? You can't eat freely, let's say. You can't just go to the fridge. Everything has to be considered. But if you do that, will it, quote unquote, work? And the answer is emphatically no. This method that kids are being taught and people are being taught doesn't work. Kids with type 1 diabetes that follow the standard model average an A1C of around 8%, which is an average blood sugar of about triple normal levels. It's an average blood sugar of around 200. And it's not a constant 200. You're going high into the 300s, and then you're going down into the 40s. It's this, we call it the blood sugar roller coaster. That blood sugar roller coaster causes over 100 complications of diabetes and will shorten a child's lifespan by more than a decade. That's the research. You will not be told that. You have to learn that on your own. We've left this information. We'll leave it in your podcast, but this information is all over the place now. You just have to seek it, and you have to get your head out of the sand. Okay, so this method doesn't work. Not only that, but what's happened in the last 10 years is that the type 2 diabetes epidemic has hit the type 1 diabetes community. So kids now with type 1 diabetes have more obesity, higher obesity rates than non-diabetic kids, where it's already a national catastrophe. So not only are the kids getting inflammation from constant chronic high blood sugars, but they're getting fat, they're becoming obese, and they're developing double diabetes. This is the standard. My son, and by the way, when you introduced me, the most important thing in the introduction we left out, which is that my son has had diabetes for over 10 years. He's had an A1C of 5.0% or less and average blood sugars in the 80s and 90s. But he takes plenty of insulin. There's no cure here. We work on that 24/7. We can get into that. We work 24/7 on his diabetes management because that's just the nature of the disease, right? So you contrast Dave's experience with the standard experience of the type 1 child. And you would think, and Dave's been very vocal, he was on Sean Baker too, you would think that Dave and me would be held up by the standard American Diabetes Association, JDRF, all these organizations beyond type 1 that you're going to see when you become, in this type 1 community. You would think, oh, Dave's going to be the keynote speaker of every diabetes event or every diabetes charity event. They're going to hold him up. Look what you can do with this disease. Nope. The standard model of diabetes and the industry that's behind it will try to suppress the voices of people doing well. They will not tell you what the consequences are. And so that's why we're making this podcast.
Wow. This next clip is taken from episode 721, titled The Keto Prescription with Dr. Jody Nishida. I've been fortunate enough to meet Jody at several low carbohydrate conferences now. This was an awesome episode. I'm so glad I got to chat with her. Obviously, you can hear the passion in her voice as she talks about this topic, which is medications and in particular statins. Your explanation of LDL was fantastic. And I just heard this recently from Dr. Ben Bickman. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's like there is an alternate universe that exists where LDL cholesterol is hailed as the superhero of the immune system. And we live in the world where LDL cholesterol is the villain of the cardiovascular system. I thought that was so well said. That really stuck with me.
I love that. And he's absolutely right, because the only reason why that target LDL guidelines became lower and lower and lower is because you look on the American Heart Association's website, American College of Cardiology's website, who writes these guidelines. Most of them sit on the boards of companies like Pfizer, J&J, Procter & Gamble, the big wigs. These are not objective medical opinions, in my opinion, and he's right. The lower your LDL goes, the weaker your immune system. At what point in time did we move so far away from basic physiology at the cellular level? We know you need cholesterol for healthy cell walls. Wait, what? Okay, so our human body is made up of trillions of cells, and we need cholesterol for every cell wall. Yeah, that's how important it is. We need cholesterol for hormone production. Look at how many people have hormone imbalance issues. And we need cholesterol for a strong immune system. My goal for me personally is I always want my total cholesterol at or above 250. Why? Because at the age of 51, that means that I've got hormone balance, strong cell walls, and a heck of strong immune system. And that matters to me. Men are supposed to be at 220, 225. My LDL KC averages 190 on any given day. And I've done serial blood draws 1 hour apart just to prove that the longer you fast, the more your body's going to pump out fuel, aka cholesterol, LDL, and it's going to keep going up the longer you fast. So if someone comes to me and their LDL is 190, my first question is, okay, at the time when you walked into the lab and they took your blood, how many hours were you fasting? Write that down. Did you exercise harder than usual in the 3 days prior to your blood draw? Have you been more stressed out lately? Are you on your period? There are all these things that affect LDL, and doctors are not asking the right questions.
That's right. Wow. Amazing. Yeah, that was so well explained. I want to talk to you about one more class of drugs just because they're so popular these days. I've heard you comment about this and I found it very interesting. GLP-1 agonists. What is your opinion about the direction this is going? I think most people would think of Ozempic. There's a whole slew of different ones that are coming out for different indications. So there's type 2 diabetes indications and weight loss indications. Those are the same drugs as I understand, but different dosages, different goals. But as a pharmacist, what do you think about these?
May I give you both my opinion and my experience?
You can give me both. And just for the listener who is not watching, I saw Jody roll her eyes maybe just slightly 2 or 3 times. Yes, I would love to hear both.
My opinion is that this is going to be the next OxyContin epidemic.
Oof.
Novo Nordisk is not a stupid company, okay? They know, the pharmaceutical companies know people are lazy. What? I can get a shot once a week and lose all this weight? Sign me up. 95% of people are going to choose that over diet and exercise because people are lazy. We're literally becoming out of the Disney cartoon WALL-E, where we're all obese. We don't even know how to walk anymore. And we just sip on soda and watch TV all day, right? It's literally heading in that direction, people. Just please open your eyes and pay attention. That's my opinion. It's going to be the next OxyContin epidemic. My experience has been, I have people coming to me that were put on Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, Rybelsus, and Mounjaro by their physician. 0 education was given. 0 appropriate medical screening was done. So if you have a history of acid reflux, delayed gastric emptying, which is very common in diabetes, constipation, you are not an appropriate candidate for these medications. People are having severe impacted constipation. They are having to go to the ER. They are having to have sections of their colon surgically removed because of these drugs, but no one's talking about it. Why? Because I get emails all the time. So let's pretend I'm now Dr. Jody, lazy, greedy Dr. Jody. And I'm getting all these emails in my inbox from China, Vietnam, India, Mexico, Canada. Everybody wants to sell me generic semaglutide for dirt cheap. Nice. I'm all over it, Casey. So now I'm putting up ads and putting up flyers in the hallway in front of my office. Come to me to get semaglutide cheaper because insurance isn't covered anymore unless you've got diabetes. So I get, let's say I pay $10 for this drug, but I'm going to charge you $1,200 for a 2-month supply. Not only do I get your money for that, I get to bill your insurance every single time you walk into my office for a 3-second injection. Stop and think what kind of culture this is creating amongst physicians. You're a doctor. You've got this super huge house. Your wife probably doesn't work. Your kids might be in private school. You got one away in college. You've got 5 Teslas, whatever it is. You have to maintain this lifestyle you started. You're going to do this all day long, right? So not only is it creating an OxyContin epidemic within patients, it is feeding the greed culture amongst physicians at the cost of people's health. And at the end of the day, they still don't know how to eat or exercise. This is a disgrace. It's disgusting.
Strong statement. This next clip is taken from episode 679 entitled Adverse Reactions to Medications with Dr. Steve and Teresa Hewlett. This is continuing on the same theme of medications, obviously, and we are continuing to talk about statins in this episode, and you can hear also how passionate Steve is about prescribing statins. Absolutely love these guys. I've been fortunate enough to be hosted on their show as well, which I really love. And yeah, this episode was released on July 29th, 2024. Hope you enjoyed this clip. I did want to start by asking you what we've already mentioned, statins. Statin drugs are designed to lower cholesterol. We've been told for, a century, half a century, that high levels of cholesterol are bad for you. So we want to reduce that. We could do that by eating different things in the diet. So we've been promoting the consumption of vegetable oils, seed oils, polyunsaturated fats, replacing saturated fats, which we know will reduce your cholesterol for sure. You can also do that pharmacologically, where you're taking a pill, a statin drug. You said there's almost no value in a statin drug. Right. Explain that for people, because I'm hearing so many people, not only did I know that tons of people were being on it, but it's just more and more and more. Their ages get younger and younger and younger. I just talked to somebody in their 40s who is now on one and hates it. Like, tell us a little bit about why we thought that this drug could help us. Has it been effective, and what are the downsides?
The first thing is because they tell you that LDLs, high LDLs, which is, they say it's cholesterol. LDL isn't cholesterol. It's a protein and cholesterol and triglycerides all together in one big lump. That's why it's called a lipoprotein. But they've been telling everybody that LDLs is what causes cardiovascular disease. And it's been proven over and over and over that that is not true. LDLs don't have anything to do with it. Don't really have anything to do with it. But LDLs, there's good LDLs and there's bad LDLs. What makes the bad LDLs is eating so many carbohydrates that your liver has to turn all those carbohydrates into fat by what triglycerides and store that as fat. That's what's going on. And so when you take a cholesterol medicine, every single cell in your body makes cholesterol. Cholesterol is vital. It's vital to our existence. A lot of our hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, vitamin D, cortisol, those are all hormones that are made out of cholesterol. Every single cell in your body is made out of fat. It has a fatty membrane in it. I mean, every single cell makes cholesterol. That's how important it is. Our brain uses 20 to 25% of all the cholesterol that our body makes. It is valuable. The way statins work is they block that when a cell is, because your cell takes cholesterol and it turns it into a whole bunch of different things that your body needs. So cholesterol really is kind of like the base that your cell needs. When your cell doesn't have any cholesterol, if you're taking a statin and it doesn't have any cholesterol because the statins are keeping that, statins, they block that system inside the cell. That's what happens. A statin gets inside the cell. It blocks the system of how the cell can turn that cholesterol and all these other vital nutrients that our body needs. So when the statin blocks that means it's blocking the cell from doing its function. It can't produce all these other things that is made out of cholesterol. So your body starts going into a survival mode. It's like, whoa. I need cholesterol in here so I can make all these things that I do. So what it does is the cell upregulates. It puts more receptors all around the outside of it. So any cholesterol that's coming by through your bloodstream, it can grab it easier and pull that cholesterol into it so we can start making it stuff. So the reason statins work is your body is lowering your blood cholesterol because it's trying to pull it inside to try to make these vital things that you need. So you're killing the cell with a statin, and as it's dying, it's trying to get cholesterol as a last ditch effort. But they don't tell people that. All they say is, look at your blood cholesterol. It's going down. All right, isn't that great? They don't tell you that you're killing your cells. You have to see that by all the numerous adverse effects that people have. And that's what's happening. You're killing your muscle cells. You're killing your nerve cells. You're killing your heart. You're killing all the cells in your body because you're starving them from the cholesterol that's desperately needed. And again, so there's nothing good about it. You don't need to be bringing down the LLs. If you want to bring down the bad LDLs, you quit eating carbohydrates because the bad LDLs are made out of excessive glucose that gets turned into triglycerides. So, I mean, it's, again, I never knew any of this. I never knew this. I just knew if they have high cholesterol, you give them a statin. That's just the way it is. I never looked at it any further than that. And when I did, it made me sick. And, you know, I all I'm saying is every single friend and family member that I know, that I love, I told them to stop their statins immediately.
Wow.
And they have.
Wow.
When I found out what statins were really doing, and the only reason that they're still promoting it is because the ungodly amounts of money. And they make so much money. I've read so much since then. It's crazy. They make so much money that they don't care about all the adverse effect about them getting sued, because they will gladly pay out the money to sell that out of court because they're making so much money on the selling of these drugs. It makes me sick. It really, really does. So, and I'm not telling everybody else to do that. You do not do that. You do your own thing. I'm just saying, I told my family, my brother, I told my brother to get off it. I told my cousins to get off it. I've told my friends to get off of it. Because once I found that out, it was just crazy.
Oh my goodness. It's infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating. One woman I talked to just this week was saying that her heart disease runs in her family. She's been on a statin for decades at this point. She's in probably her 50s or whatever. And you can see the resistance, not that she doesn't want to get off of it, because she does want to get off of it. And she understands when I'm explaining some of these things to her, but there's like a psychological kind of dependency to it. Like you can tell she's a little bit scared about going off of the statin that she thinks is kind of protecting her. It's so wild.
Her doctor's been telling her that for a year and prescribing it. So,
and her doctor believes it. He truly believes it. And I totally 100% agree. I understand. I don't agree, but I totally understand where they're coming from. They don't know. They don't know this stuff either. Unless you go off grid and you start reading all this stuff on your own, you're under the whims of whatever the drug company comes out here and tells you need to be prescribing next.
Yep.
So it's not the doctor's fault at all.
Right. Yeah, we just we interviewed Dr. Kate Shanahan recently. She just came out with her new book, Dark Calories, which is really great, all about vegetable oils. And she writes extensively about how much she hates statins. And she recommended a video that I ended up going and watching, which was a video that said, statins made me stupid. And this guy is talking about his experience on a statin and how he started taking it because they were worried about his cholesterol. He was on a 40 milligram dose of whatever one he was on. He said it was kind of a moderate dose. And his brain was just failing him. He would forget things. He'd walk into one room and forget why he went in that room to begin with. He would play, different games with his family and couldn't remember easy sequences and stuff that he was remembering like a week or two ago. And he was still on board with I really want to do something about my cholesterol and I'm not sure what to do. So I'm just reducing my dose and I don't know what else to do. I don't know if 5 milligrams even does much, but that's all I'm taking now. And it's like, man, even he acknowledged I really want to drop my cholesterol, but these trade-offs, I don't know if they're worth it. I'm not really sure. And it's like, dude, if you only knew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now, if he hears this, he'll see, that's why I was acting the way, because the brain uses 25% of all the cholesterol your body makes. Every single cell in your body makes cholesterol. Your liver makes about 80% of it, but every single cell can. So you're actually killing your nerve cells in your brain. And that's exactly what they're saying. You're starving these cells. You're killing them by doing this stuff. Yeah. So that's one drug that you can't just stop. You don't need to wean off because there's nothing positive about it. But that's what sucks, because the American Diabetic Association, the American Heart Association, obviously them, everybody is still pushing this, that high LDLs is what causes cardiovascular disease. But that's why they're pushing it, because they are making lots and lots and lots and lots of money. And we never, it's just crazy. Just like going into the government, not being able to do some of these stuffs. And now when Obama came in, he started allowing drug companies and government to start commingling. And now the drug companies have more lobbyists in our Congress than any other group. They have up to 2 lobbyists per congressman in our thing. So that's why they're writing all these laws, they're writing all these things that are just making everybody sick, but making them lots of money. There's so much money to transfer in hands up there.
Wow.
At the expense of us. And that's why in one of my talks, that's why I'm saying if you're obese and if you're unhealthy, it is not your fault, but it is your responsibility, because right now, after you listen to these podcasts and see all these things, now you realize, oh, I have been lied to, and I need to take my health into my own hands,
Sure.
which sucks. But when you do, and that's what these people are doing. There's another friend of mine that I've been helping. He was heavy, and he contacted me, and his doctor wanted to put him on diabetic meds, cholesterol meds, and
I don't know.
Oh, sugar on diabetic meds, cholesterol meds, and blood pressure meds. And he'd been listening to my podcast, and I actually went to school with him. So I haven't heard from him I graduated in 1980, so I haven't heard from him since then. And he contacted me.
Long time ago.
A long time ago there, Casey. But he contacted me and he asked me what I thought. And so I told him exactly what we talk about, and so he did it. And he contacted me. He was so happy. He just contacted me last month?
Something, yeah.
Last month. So he had his labs a year ago. And then last month he went in for his annual, he had his labs again. He didn't even leave the doctor's office. He was so happy. He contacted me. He photographed his labs. He sent it to me. He said, look at this. He said, my doctors could not believe his triglycerides went down from, I don't even want to guess. There were some like 250 and they went down to like 71.
Wow.
I mean, it was so wonderful. But his doctor's like, and he knew his doctor, they're friends, and they know people that they play basketball with. And so they're friends. So he said, you go and tell yada, 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 these other friends, tell him what you did. Because first thing he said, so how did you do this? Did you lay off the red meat? Is that what you did? Laid off the red meat and got away from fat and cholesterol? He's like, no. He said, I did the exact opposite. He said, I ate a lot of red meat. I said, it's full fat. He said, I just got off all the man-made products, all the sugar, all the flour, all that stuff. And he's like, you have got to go tell everybody. He said, I had no idea.
This next clip is taken from episode 593, titled Shrinking Fat Cells, Insulin versus Energy, with Benjamin Bickman, PhD. What an honor it was to host him again. He is a returning guest. We hosted him back on episode 30, which means he was one of the very first people to say that, yes, he would be a guest on our show, which was a huge honor. 2024 was the year that I got to meet him in person at the COSI conference in Las Vegas, and he is such a cool guy. He's just as kind and wonderful in person as he makes himself out to be. This was also one of our top, most popular episodes, not only with the episode downloads that we get from the podcast, but also on YouTube as well. So be sure to check that out. And here's that clip with Dr. Ben Bickman. Well, your book is all about insulin resistance. It's actually absolutely wonderful. I absolutely love it. I told you last time, I tell you again, it's a very shareable book. It's a good resource that I can give to people and know that they will understand. And it's called Why We Get Sick. And you've been talking recently more about how we get fat, which I think is an interesting question. And you kind of go through this in your presentation where you're talking about different fat cells, not only multiplying, but also, like you're just describing, getting bigger. Can you talk about those two things, if that's a good entry point into this conversation?
Oh, yeah, it sure is. Yeah, I very much have, when it comes to insulin resistance, and the reason we talk about this, of course, is because it is the most prevalent disorder on the planet. I've given versions of talks about insulin resistance in dozens of countries around the world, from the Middle East to Southeast Asia to North Asia. This is a problem. Europe. This is a problem that is almost infecting the entire world. It is the single most common problem. Again, just to really make that clear. And so that's why I feel very justified in focusing on this as a career. It is so meaningful. I very much have a fat first focus when it comes to insulin resistance, that it's the fat cells. Now, insulin resistance is, while it is one single problem, you can get to it from multiple ways. That's a little frustrating, is that there are multiple noxious stimuli that can get a body to insulin resistance. But if I were to sum up the most common and gradual progression of the average individual, it's going to be the fat cells that fall first. It's like the stack of dominoes, and each domino is a different tissue of the body. It's the fat cell that is the first domino, and then it starts bumping into the liver and muscle and the pancreas, and other cells of the pancreas. So it starts to spread and amplify in a way. But the fat tissue is the first one to become insulin resistant, and it's all about how fat cells grow. And I'm stating that very precisely because it's not necessarily, that is not the same as how much fat a body has. Or to say that all another way, it's not a matter of fat mass, it's a matter of the size of each individual fat cell that determines whether this body is getting ever more into insulin resistance and inflammation, or whether it is staying healthy, insulin sensitive and metabolically sound. Now, as you alluded to, you could have two different people who have gained the exact same amount of fat. Let's say they've each gained 10 pounds of fat, but they can have gained that fat through two totally different mechanisms. One of the things, again, that is unique about fat is not only its ability to grow each cell substantially, but also to multiply in some instances and in some people. Now, these are two different processes, respectively, called hypertrophy, when the size of each cell is changing, their volume, it's like you're blowing up a balloon, or opposed to hyperplasia, which is when the size of the fat cell is normal, but they're multiplying, they're proliferating. So we're not blowing up the balloon, we're just getting more balloons in the pile here. And so there's relatively more we're holding on to. But again, it's whether the size of the balloons have changed, but the number hasn't, that's hypertrophy, or whether the number has changed, but the size really hasn't, that's hyperplasia. Now, as I've already alluded to, it really is a matter of size. And now that is largely genetic, but also influenced through diet to a lesser degree. But some people have the genetic potential just to continue to make more and more fat cells. These are the people who can continue to get fat. They just keep getting fatter. These are the people who get to 500 or 600 pounds. The average person could never get that fat. Casey, you and I could do our darndest. We would never get that big. Maybe we'd get to the upper 200s, maybe 300. For me, that would be impossible. Maybe I would say at the most, I could get to the mid 200s. I simply could not get any further than that. And that's because my body doesn't make limitless new fat cells, as most people's body don't. And so there ends up being this kind of threshold. Because your fat cell number isn't changing, it really is a matter of how full can your fat cells get. Now, a cell can only get so big, just like a balloon can only be filled with so much water. If it continues to force more fluid in or fat in the case of the fat cell, it would burst. The same thing would happen with the fat cell. So the fat cell that's undergone such substantial hypertrophy begins to resist the signal telling it to continue to grow. That signal is insulin. There's no other signal that's telling the fat cell to grow like insulin is. And so as the fat cell is reaching a point of maximum dimension, it begins to tell insulin, you want me to keep growing, but I can't. So I'm becoming resistant to you. I'm not listening to you anymore. So that's the insulin resistance component. But at the same time, fat cells, every cell in the body must be within just a few micrometers of a capillary or blood vessels in order to get oxygen and to give up its CO2 and to get nutrients and to give off its waste metabolites. So it needs to be within a few microns or a few micrometers. Unfortunately, with hypertrophy, a fat cell can get to several times that same distance. And so the fat cells start to push each other further and further away from capillaries and thus begin to suffocate, which is a process or a term called hypoxia. Now, one way to correct the hypoxia is for the fat cell to begin secreting pro-inflammatory hormones or proteins called cytokines. And they do, in fact, activate inflammation in the body. But one consequence of the inflammation is the growth of new blood vessels. So the fat cell is secreting all of these pro-inflammatory proteins in order to induce the production of new blood vessels in an effort to try to correct its hypoxia. Now, it does improve the ability of the fat cell to survive, but then the rest of the body is paying the consequence for this. the fat, these two things, becoming insulin resistant and becoming pro-inflammatory, that the fat cell is doing in order to ensure its own survival, become two very relevant things when we look at the consequences throughout the body. So the rest of the body is suffering all in order for the fat cell to continue to survive. And as I mentioned, it's very much genetic, and our genes, of course, determine our sex. And so it's no surprise that there's some sex-specific phenomena here as well, namely that women have a higher capacity for hyperplasia than men. And so it's no surprise knowing that women will naturally have more fat than men, but be healthier while they have more of those fat cells. And that's entirely a function of sex hormones like estradiol, and even progesterone contributes to that. But it's also then no surprise that as the woman goes through menopause, she now begins to suffer the consequences of that fat. So I kind of joke, although a menopausal woman wouldn't appreciate it, that once the woman goes through menopause, she sort of loses her metabolic superpowers. That prior to that, prior to menopause, she's kind of invulnerable to these to real substantial metabolic problems. Now, that's not to say a woman can't have metabolic problems, but it will be much less than it is in her male counterpart. But once she goes through menopause, then she's mortal now, just like her male counterpart has always been, and she'll start to suffer the consequences of that fat mass, just like he does. But anyway, all of this is my long-winded way of saying we can grow fat through two different ways. And one is healthier than the other, namely hyperplasia offering more metabolic benefit than hypertrophy. But unfortunately, most people who gain weight, and I mean most people, it's about 88% of all people, they gain it through hypertrophy if they're gaining fat mass.
This next clip is taken from episode 637, entitled The Carnitarian Linda Salant Returns to Discuss Carnivore Diet Trends. This episode was released on May 27th, 2024. Linda is also a great friend. Haven't been able to meet her in person yet, but looking forward to one day. She is an expert in all things carnivore diet, so we invited her back this year to discuss what she saw as a few different trends emerging from the carnivore diet. So that was a great episode. Be sure to go check that out if you want to listen to the full episode, which again is episode 637. I wonder if we can comment on that kind of state of the state of something that you mentioned, like the carnivore that uses a bit of tomato paste, or the level of strictness to say that you're a carnivore or not a carnivore. I've been talking more about this because I'm finding more and more of this in the community, that there seems to be like you have to define your level of carnivory or something, where I always just thought of the animal definition of carnivore is you're eating primarily animal products, and little things might sneak in. Some people might be more strict or less strict. To me, I never really got worked up about whether somebody was perfectly strict or not. So my first question is, do you think we're getting stuck in the weeds as a community as far as like trying to, take away somebody's carnivore card for eating a sliver of avocado or including, other plant foods in the diet? And secondly, I wonder what you think about, kind of the squabbling that seems to be going on when it comes to those really small percentages, when we seem to agree about so many things, but maybe have differences of opinions in other things. What are you observing as far as that goes?
So what I think is yes, generally, we don't need to pull anybody's carnivore card for adding in things like avocado. I think it does a disservice. So true, avocado is not carnivore. So if you want to say, I am a strict carnivore, then maybe you have to qualify it, and you have to say, but sometimes I eat avocado and sometimes I eat onion and I like a little paprika, whatever it is, you feel the need to say that. But where I think the disservice there is that not everybody comes to carnivore with an autoimmune disease or a leaky gut or some kind of skin condition that they're trying to heal, right? Or Lyme disease or something where they've got to be so strict. They come to carnivore for health benefits like that I found. They come for, some weight loss and some health benefits sort of jump on board with that, right? And then you can do that with like what I'd call 99% carnivore. Now, there are people out there that have other reasons for coming to carnivore that will say 99% carnivore is torture. Like 100% is where you need to be. Because if you're coming from a place of like, say, food addiction, sugar addiction, and you try to be 99% carnivore, except sneak in a piece of cake at, even if it's once a month at a party or at an event or a social gathering, or, have a margarita once a month, that is torture and for that person. And so 100% carnivore is going to do it. But if it is going to be what they want. But for the other people who come to carnivore looking for some body recomposition, looking to gain some muscle, lose some fat, get rid of some headaches, normalize their periods, just give themselves nutrient dense food. If we make them be so strict that it becomes unsustainable for them, where they say, I can't do carnivore because sometimes I like avocado, or sometimes I just feel like having some lettuce. Then what happens is we push them to the outside. They feel as though, well, it didn't work for me. I may as well go back to like chips and pizza. And I don't think that's quite nice. So you can use the definition of carnivore, zero carb carnivore, or the original that what I learned from did include spices. But something like the Lion diet, which is very strict, is like meat and salt and water. I think people now are sort of saying that's real carnivore. That's what you've got to do. And I just don't think that that's what you've got to do for everybody. Like, sure, for some people, absolutely, that's what you've got to do. But that is the strictest, call it level 1 carnivore. And some people can fall into level 2, add dairy, all the way through to like level 4, where they're okay if the ribs that they're eating have been sauced in the smoker and then they order them without sauce on top, but that little bit of sauce in the smoker isn't going to affect them. And I think that that's absolutely still okay. Because if you are finding the health improvements with your version of carnivore, I'm not going to play your carnivore card. And I don't think that we should be squabbling over something like that. It doesn't make sense to say you're not carnivore because you put that chopped onion in your tuna salad. Like, come on. Nobody went wrong with a little bit of chopped onion. That's not what got anybody in the boat that they're trying to get out of. So those little things, like I like to use tomato paste, and I do some Italian style things with tomato, and it works for me. It's fine for me. I'm still on my carnivore journey with my tomato, and I know some people do it with onion and they get a lot of crap for it. And it just seems very silly to argue about some onion or some tomato.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Both of us at this point have had several years of experience in coaching other people. So I'm just going to ask this question, like observationally, what have you observed? And I would say, like, with the people that I've coached, I can probably think of the number of people that I've worked with over the years that still are literally, truly, very much strict carnivore. And that number is pretty darn low. Like, when you think of all the people that you have coached through a carnivore diet, how many of them, again, by necessity, they have to be there, they want to be there, are 100% strict, and they are strict all the time? Is that a very big number or a pretty small number?
No, it's not a big number at all. In fact, I can't think of a client who has ever just done beef salt and water or ruminant animal salt and water. Because the vast majority of people are just like regular people. They're not on this extreme that we see on social media, like Instagram, where it makes, practically it makes good content to be extreme, right? To be the strictest of carnivore and say you cannot have anything. It's pretty good content. It's a compelling story. And that's just not everybody's reality. I think people are less focused on nutrition than the people who are yelling about nutrition online, including myself. They just want to feel better. They don't want to talk about, I'm the strictest carnivore in the land. They just want to feel better and get on with their life and play with their kids. And, so the clients that I see range from, doing what I do, like where you've got spices and a little bit of sauce. It's all, and then they go straight through up to like low carb, where they're still eating vegetables and salads and, more than I would do. So very few people I find can sustain a very strict carnivore diet. What happens too is I see in the space, and maybe you've seen this, a lot of carnivores who, they talk about you have to be strict carnivore. All of a sudden, then they start talking about, I feel like I need a reset. I feel like I need a reset. Like, what do you need a reset from? Like, what happened? Like, what went wrong? Something went wrong. And if that strictness is causing you to sort of like fall off the wagon and dip into something, that you shouldn't have, then maybe that strictness isn't working for you. And a little bit more of a relaxed approach would keep you from falling off the wagon, dipping into 2 pounds of cheese and needing a reset.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a really, really good point. One other thing I wanted to ask you, I'm hearing about this more, not something that I'm observing. When I see long-term carnivore people, I'm observing people like yourself, people like Dr. Lisa Wiedemann or Dr. Canberry, Dr. Chafee. Like, I see people who look incredibly healthy. They don't look like they have any nutrient deficiencies. If they do, I'm not observing how that's like manifesting in their lives. These are very happy, active, healthy people from what I can tell. There's some people that are saying if you go too strict for too long, you will have nutrient deficiencies. I'm still struggling to connect how that is manifesting. So in your own personal experience from things you've observed with other OG carnivores like you, and the group that you got into when you first got into this, are you noticing anything that's really manifesting as far as long-term health concerns, nutrient deficiencies, eating a carnivore diet?
No, I'm not. I mean, the long-term carnivores, I don't believe that they're lying. And I do believe that they are just eating like, ribeyes. Like the Andersons, I do believe are just eating ribeyes. And there are people who swear by the fact that they don't need supplementation. They don't need to eat even liver for, nutrient density and to get the B12 and the things that they say might be lacking if you're just eating the meat without the liver. So even to that point, I think, no, I don't think that being strict carnivore is going to be detrimental to anybody. I do believe you can get everything you need from just meat, salt, and water.
This next clip is taken from episode 607, titled Putting Parkinson's and Rheumatoid Arthritis into Remission with Mimi Morgan. These next few episodes, are all going to be about mental health and the emerging field of metabolic psychiatry. And these are going to be personal stories, people that have gone through really heavy difficulties with mental health and have found ketogenic therapeutic diets to be very, very helpful and share their stories here on our show. We were so honored to host Mimi. So let's get to that clip with her. Well, I've had the opportunity to host both Dr. Chris Palmer and also Dr. Georgia Eid. Both are authors of amazing books about mental health, and asking them what would be an expected, like, kind of good story before they discovered like metabolic health and how to like really help people with mental health issues in particular. Obviously, you had lots more going on just besides that, but like a good win before would have been something like, we find a medication that this person can like kind of manage and maybe like not lose their job. And that might only work for a limited amount of time, maybe 6 months, 12 months, or there's going to be all these terrible side effects they have to deal with, versus what they do now, again, with metabolic therapy is completely different. But I mean, the best case scenarios with some of these diagnoses, according to the medical system, is pretty dire, pretty crappy, and a terrible kind of quality of life, while you're waiting to see if anything's going to improve anyway. Terrible.
Right. Yeah. Well, absolutely. And, my family was sure I was depressed. I went through extensive testing. Parkinson's is unlike really anything else, in that you spend hours and sometimes days inside a clinic with a team of doctors looking at you, assessing you. And I had been actually diagnosed by 3 of the top 12 centers in the U.S. we went to. Wow. And so, I really had great care. I had a lot of assessment. I had 2 batteries of cognitive testing. My family was sure I'm not moving because I was depressed. And they tried medication on me, which just made me worse. And, I had the test and he says, "You're not depressed." he said, you're just as part of the, because you don't get the messages the same. So people with Parkinson's don't have that, and I forget what the name is called, but they don't register pleasure the same. So when you do something, so if you're out, running and you feel good, you get those endorphins. Well, you want to go back and run again. Well, for people with Parkinson's or neuro disease in that family, well, they might get the pleasure, but then it's all forgotten the next day.
Wow.
So there's no sort of reward. And so it's really hard then to get to do something because you don't have a memory in your body of that reward system.
Wow.
But it's only a medication to mask the symptoms, nothing to treat it, except for, which I find really fascinating now, and I see a lot of people with Parkinson's, I work at the senior center, is exercise. Every doctor, and I probably saw 8 doctors in all these teams, said the best thing you can do before you take your medication is exercise is your best medication. So that makes me really pause and think about, well, why isn't that thought about across the board in all medical fields? But that's the one thing that can slow or treat the symptoms better than actually medication, especially when you're early on.
Interesting. One of my clients, his mother has moved on, but she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he hired another mutual friend of ours who's a personal trainer, and he wisely would show up to this woman's house and put a record on the record player, and they would just dance. It wasn't a personal trainer to actually do what we consider exercise. It was movement. It was a form of exercise, and I would say a very highly coordinated and natural movement, which would be dance. And so, it definitely helped. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and so you wonder why isn't it used across the board for everything, and even as a form of prevention?
Because it's free. That's why.
Right. That's right. I know.
The doctor doesn't make money on that. Okay, so
no, they don't.
I don't think we're to the good part of the story just yet, right? You still had a few other things that you were suffering with.
No, so I had a lot of sleep disturbances that just made things worse. Neuro-related dystonia, which is very painful, where your limbs seize up in all sorts of odd shapes, and that was part of it. But no, I came home and I did physical therapy 3 times a week. I had home health care with a walker. Got rid of the walker about 6 months after, and went to cane. And did that for almost about 15 months. And it was at that point they said, okay, it's not going to get any better with physical therapy. You're just going to have to accept that this is where you are. And, I was on occasionally, maybe twice a month, I could get a quarter mile, but it set me back for 4 or 5 days. I'd be in such pain. I couldn't move. So I really was where I was at that point, almost 2 years into it, or a year and a half, was as I could walk a few blocks, and was really still on antibiotics. The infection was that bad. They said I'd have to be on life, and they thought I had a good chance of it coming back, and I probably wouldn't beat it next time. I had too many things wrong with me, and my body just, and I say, 50%, and actually Dr. Baker says, I would have given you a whole lot less chance of surviving it. It does have a tendency to come back. It encapsulates in your body and hides and waits for an opportune moment.
Wow.
And so it's pretty dismal. And then I had my aha moment.
Let's hear the aha moment. This is a good time for some good news here.
Good news. So, I was walking and I get to this it's my mailbox store. I was walking, got a couple blocks, and I passed this mailbox, and it was pretty much the turning point where my body had enough. And one day I looked at it and I was like, I'm done. I just, let this take me. I just I had no fight left in me. I just didn't. And I was just over it, and I turn around in absolute defeat, and I hear a message, and it's, okay, so you can't walk where you want to walk. What do you have in you? And I stopped and I scanned my body, probably for the first time in years. And I said, I have 10 steps, kind of shrugging my shoulders. So I turned around and I walked 10 steps and I went home. And I thought nothing of it. Because I just, my mind was almost in a fog and I thought nothing of it. I went back and got to the mailbox and 10 more steps. And I stopped and asked myself that question and did 10 more steps. And I did that every day for months. And I would say within 9 to 12 months later, I had walked over 1 mile, whereas I couldn't get anywhere for the first year and a half.
Wow.
Forcing myself to do something, I just couldn't get anywhere. But those 10 steps carried me, and a few months obviously I'm eating hard carb and I'm barely moving, and I had put on some weight, and about 3 months after my 10-step journey, I went across the street to somebody who was a chiropractor. He had the diet clinic, but he had a different approach than everybody else. And I came with my bag of medicine and my list of all my ailments. And he spent an hour and a half with me. And that's where he said, all right, I'm going to want you to do something that's contrary to what you're doing. You're going to trust me. And I said, sure, without knowing what he was going to say. And that's where he said, I want you to eat 50% fat, 25 protein, 25 carbs. That's how I went. And I was like, whoa, okay. One, my medicine's not going to work and I can't afford to do that. And number two, you're going to make me fat and I want to lose weight. So, he talked with me a little bit more and I was like, okay, I'll give it a try at this point, because I really was not feeling well. And I don't want to go back to the doctors because they were just going to give me another medication. I'm already on 13 plus and I'm just being really poisoned with really on some strong medications. And I had an app to help me manage them. I mean, it was just every hour and a half I was taking some medication for something else.
Wild. Wow.
And it was like 50 pills a day or something ridiculous. Plus, I had injections. And it was just, for 3 months, I get my Parkinson's, I get a bottle of 900 pills.
Whoa.
Every 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the pharmacist would and that was just the one medication. And that didn't even include the nighttime dosage that I had to take. That was another 90. But so I did that. And I was saying about 3 months, a month I wasn't feeling worse, which was positive. And about 3 months, I started to feel better eating this way. I mean, I don't know if I had 50% of a day's worth of diet worth of fat in a month previous. And my body was absolutely craving it. And, I just slowly but surely just started getting better and better. And it was about 6 to 9 months in, I said, can I cut my carbs a little bit more? I don't want them. And they were healthy carbs. It was clean keto what I did. It wasn't, packaged or junk food. It might have been a sweet potato or a dried, I might do a plantain on one day, but it was good, nutritious food. I started to add steak more. I started to crave steak more. Started to want the whole steak. Started to want to eat the whole fat naturally. And then was when my fat got up to 70, 80% that I noticed that my neuro symptoms were getting better. And that's 9 months down the road. And that's where the light bulb went off in my head.
Wow, that's amazing. When you go back, you say you were doing quote unquote clean keto. Did you know at the time you were doing clean keto, or were you just kind of following the chiropractor's kind of recommendations to just have more fat?
Yeah, I was just doing that to get my 50% fat. And then, I started to, because I'm starting to feel better. He started to send me info and said, how about, why don't you start, I had eliminated nightshades. And of course I wasn't doing gluten. I hadn't been doing that either because of the RA. That I started to then explore a little bit more keto and realize it was, but yeah, I eat healthy, so that was kind of the natural part. So at first, no, I wasn't aware that it had a name, keto. Eventually it did. And I definitely, by the time that I was 80% fat, that I noticed a huge change with my neuro, including my cognitive was improving. I started to notice I didn't need to take my pills every 3.5 hours. Normally, I could tell you within the minute it was time to take the pills because I could feel my body starting to slow down and the medication wearing down. And now I'm getting a 4.5 hours, which was pretty miraculous. And I was like, I don't need to take a dose, and yet. And that really was my light bulb moment where I connected everything, and I realized, oh, wow, I'm healing, and I'm not sure, what I have wrong with me. And that's where I started to feel hopeful. Wow. And then I just ran with it.
This next clip is taken from episode 702 entitled Living Well with Schizophrenia with Lauren Kennedy West. This episode was released on September 13th, 2024. She has an absolutely amazing story. Her channel on YouTube was called Living Well with Schizophrenia. And after finding metabolic treatments for mental health and reversing her own schizophrenia without using medications, she's decided to change her channel on YouTube to Living Well After Schizophrenia. If that tells you anything, she's a very inspiring person. So be sure to go check her out and enjoy this clip. I don't want to spend too much time wallowing around in the kind of low points, but if you don't mind, can you describe at least the last time that you went in the hospital, what you believe triggered it, what that was like to get into the hospital, what it's like inside a hospital? Do you mind sharing at least some details about that?
Sure, yeah. So my last experience was a little bit different than all of the hospitalizations prior to that. So prior to that, what often happened, I guess I was hospitalized the first 2 times for suicide attempts and then like manic episodes, but oftentimes I would stop taking my medication. This was oftentimes because I would get paranoid about the medication being not good for me, poisonous in some way, or mind control, or, those kind of paranoid spirals that I would get into. And every time I went off my medication, I would very quickly fall into pretty deep psychosis and then inevitably have to be hospitalized. But the last time I was hospitalized, actually, I did not go off my medication, but I did still experience a psychotic episode. And I think what happened that time was that I was training for a marathon. And so I was running more than usual. And I think what happened was my body started to metabolize the medications that I was on differently or more, however that changed. And so, I had to increase my antipsychotic medication in that hospitalization. But I have a video on our channel where I kind of vlogged a day of that hospitalization and kind of tried to demystify, I guess, what it's like to be in a psychiatric hospital. It's really not a place where you get much in the way of treatment or really help with your psychiatric illness. It's really more a place to kind of stabilize on meds and make sure you're safe before you can go back into the community to kind of actually work on the issue. And that's kind of been my experience across the board, where the hospital really has been more a place just to kind of stay safe and stabilize.
Got it. You describe in the hospital this room that's like an isolating room. And I know most people don't get it, not like kept there forever, but you mentioned how important connection was in the beginning of this interview, and like to put somebody in complete isolation, that must be, I don't know, that must be terrifying.
Yeah, it's not great. I've been to several different hospitals and they all seem to have this kind of room that's like very sterile and like concrete bricks and not much in the way of a bed. It's like a metal gurney. And for some reason, I guess I understand the reason. They're trying to keep you and everyone else safe if you're experiencing a psychotic episode and you maybe, are not super in control of how you're behaving. But yeah, it's always been a really, really negative and almost traumatic experience to be just kind of kept in one of those cells, for lack of a better word, units or rooms, with little, contact or help or support. And so I think we have a lot of improvements that could be made in terms of how we help people experiencing psychiatric distress in a hospital setting. But yeah, again, it's really just there to keep you safe while you stabilize.
I appreciate that. As you're going through an episode, this last one again, over a year ago, you described before you went into the hospital that you were like locking yourself in the car, and Rob was trying to help get you out, but you had the keys, and so they had to call the police. Like, are you, when you are going through this, do you recall being aware of what is going on with like Rob really caring about you and trying to do the best for you? Or do you somewhat kind of lose a sense of how you're reacting to the situation?
It's hard to describe, but I think that psychosis for me, my experience of it is really just you're kind of living in the same world that you always live in, but kind of every element of the reality that you're experiencing, so I guess not really reality, is different or is shifted or altered in some way. And oftentimes it's very laced with, paranoia or, delusional thinking about people or things around you. And so, yeah, even though I know that Rob was coming at that experience or trying to navigate that from a loving and supportive place, the narrative within my head and how I was experiencing it was that he was against me, or, that kind of paranoid thinking or delusional thinking that people are out to get you or are conspiring against you in some way has always been very prominent in my experience of psychosis.
Got it. Yeah. We always talk about what it's like to go through. It's also so difficult to be supportive in that type of environment. So I appreciate that perspective from both sides. This story gets a lot better, and there's a lot of good news. When was the first time you heard about metabolic therapies for things like mental illness?
Yeah. So the first time I was hospitalized while with Rob was in 2019. And that was one of the times where I got paranoid about my medication and stopped taking it and ended up very quickly psychotic and in the hospital. And so that was kind of the first like really big experience that I went through with Rob. And so following that, Rob actually tried to do a bunch of research into potential other ways to treat or manage schizoaffective disorder that may help with what I was doing in terms of medication therapy and whatnot. And he took out a book from the library, just kind of trying to learn more about potential alternative treatments for schizophrenia and about gut health and mental illness and all that kind of stuff. I think it was called Gut and Psychology Syndrome by Natasha Campbell McBride. And in that, he read about the ketogenic diet as a potential treatment for mental illness, particularly schizophrenia. And so we actually decided to give it a go and try using medical keto. Well, we didn't really know what medical keto was. So using the ketogenic diet and the limited information we knew about it back at the beginning of 2020.
Oh, wow.
But we did a really, really bad job of it because, again, we did not know what medical keto was. And a lot of the information out there about keto is, very much the kind of fad weight loss diet information. And so it was difficult to know how to use it as an effective medical intervention. And so we didn't do it well. We were on it for about 2 months, and then, the pandemic hit, kids were home, super stressed out. It wasn't really working. And so we just kind of scrapped it. But we always kind of stayed a little bit curious about it and potential ways where we could actually use it in a better way. And we ended up having Dr. Christopher Palmer onto our channel for an interview in, I think it was February of 2023, just to kind of learn more about, metabolic dysfunction and how it relates to mental illness and if they're the same thing, and using the medical ketogenic intervention for mental illness. And so, yeah, that was something that was really on our mind and we were curious about. And then again, I ended up hospitalized in June 2023. And yeah, it kind of was more encouragement to figure out a potentially better way to treat or manage this. And so in December of 2023, we decided to give it a really good go. And yeah, we connected with people like Metabolic Mind, who helped connect us with Nicole Laurent, who has been just so instrumental in terms of doing it in a proper, medical intervention way. Got my psychiatrist and my GP on board. And yeah, we dove into just learning as much as we could about how to use it properly as a medical intervention.
Okay. I would definitely recommend Dr. Chris Palmer if you have questions about mental health and diet. That is a very good source of information. He's amazing. We're so honored to have hosted him as well. His book, Brain Energy, is incredible. And I love hearing him talk, and like the passion in his voice is, it's so strong. I love it. I'm curious, the first time you quasi kind of tried keto, I love the way Nicole describes it. Like keto for mental health should be kind of medical kind of keto. It's very different. She kind of describes it like, this is like, we're not goofing around keto. This isn't like the magazine that you see at the grocery store and, just melting a stick of butter in your coffee kind of keto. Like, this is really serious and there's a right way to do this. But I'm so curious, doing it somewhat the first time, did you notice any benefit that time?
I maybe did notice like a bit of increased mental clarity, and just stuff like no bloating or anything, which was nice. But yeah, again, we just weren't doing it well. And we also weren't understanding it as a part of, metabolic therapies in general. So the only thing we were doing really was what we thought was, keto. But again, we were not looking at electrolytes. So we struggled with keto flu for a very long time and kind of never really got out of that. No supplementation. We were still doing things like drinking alcohol and just counting that into our daily carb intake, which is a big no-no, And yeah, I think we did not have an understanding of how to properly stick to it as a medical intervention. So we didn't really get much of the benefits that we're seeing this time around.
This next clip is taken from episode 638, and it was titled Matt Dobbin's Incredible Success Story with No Sugar, No Grain, or NSNG. Matt is a very dear friend of mine, also his wife, Robin, who's dealt with bipolar in her life. I thought this was one of the best answers to a question that I got of any podcast that I did this year, as he has gone through the journey with his wife of using metabolic psychiatry to help heal her from bipolar. And as a result, Robin is essentially a lean mass hyperresponder, which means her LDL, or what most doctors would call her bad cholesterol, has gone sky high. I asked how he thought about that, and I thought this answer was absolutely wonderful. Okay, I hate to give her more airtime than she's already gotten. We already did that whole episode about her, and she's the example that I use all the time. In fact, I used it this morning when I was explaining to somebody who had never heard of the lean mass hyperresponder phenomenon to say what this is actually like, because we talk numbers and we talk about heart attacks and we talk about LDL cholesterol being a certain level, and then you get to know people and it's a person, it's my friend, it's your wife, and you I can set up this scenario by saying like, okay, people have like serious mental, physical disorders that low carb is very therapeutic for. A therapeutic nutritional ketogenic diet can really help with a lot of things. Your wife being bipolar, you experience that, going through that with her. She finds a low carbohydrate diet, symptoms improve, and eventually pretty much go away. She's not on medications. Come to find out, her cholesterol goes sky high through the roof, and it's the bad LDL cholesterol. So, okay, great. Let's mix in some more carbohydrates. The cholesterol falls, the bipolar comes back. And I always put it on people. What do you do? What would you do? You have to decide whether you want to be medicated, whether you want to off yourself because it's so miserable. She was basically comatose for like an entire decade of her life, or you get to live with either those bipolar symptoms or a very high cholesterol level. That's not fun. That's a very difficult kind of thing to face. And I don't blame anybody for feeling weird about that. When my wife turned a cholesterol test last year, it was kind of a similar thing where LDL was sky high, HDL was high, triglycerides were low, lean mass hyperresponder. It's one thing when I'm making a decision about the things that I want to eat and I'm eating a lot of meat and saturated fat. It's totally different when it's somebody who you love and it's an actual person. And so what has it been like in your experience to see that secondhand to the person that you care about the most in this entire planet, and to also see what we mentioned earlier, people like Dave Feldman doing amazing research to try to get to the bottom of this so people like your wife can feel better about the lifestyle decisions they're making.
And what I can tell you about this whole situation is that, first of all, I'm going to support Robin either way. We've been married for 21 years in May. And a lot of that time we did have, we went through the struggles of her having being bipolar and being, as you said, kind of essentially comatose. I would not trade any of these days we have right now where she's engaged. Her relationship with our daughter and our son is night and day compared to where it was when in our early years. I would not trade any of that for her being the way she was, and by eating carbohydrates and then being on a litany of medications. And you're right, it is a choice, because you've got to choose whether you want to live through hell like you did, or you want to cherish the days you have right now. But like I said, or like you said, you have Dave doing this phenomenal research that is really groundbreaking when it comes to the LMHR, that I don't think we're really scared. We're not scared of what's going to happen, because we're cherishing these days, but we're also optimistic about the future, because we know that the research is out there that's trying to show the things the great things that are coming out of people that are LMHR. She's got a 0 CAC. She's just doing. It's a phenomenal experience right now, and I wouldn't trade that for the past, not for a minute. And I encourage anybody that is a spouse that is going through an emotional roller coaster, trying to support your spouse that is bipolar. I encourage you to start looking up Metabolic Mind online. Start looking at the research. Start looking at the videos and the Bazooki group. Start looking at all that stuff, because the research they're doing is helping so many people. Listen to those stories and try to change it now before it's too late, before you lose those days.
This next clip is taken from episode 725 and an episode titled Turnaround Diabetes with Effective Communication with Dr. Roshani Singhani. This episode was released on October 30th, 2024. Dr. Roshani made a presentation at the Symposium for Metabolic Health in San Diego, knocked everybody's socks off. It was absolutely a wonderful presentation. I was not familiar with her work before this conference, and she did an amazing job talking about how we can communicate with other people to help them consider things like ketogenic or low carbohydrate diets, and to make people feel heard and feel honored. I thought was so incredible. I really wanted to include this. It was one of my favorite episodes that we did all year. I think we can talk all about how amazing ketogenic and low carbohydrate diets are, all about the metabolic psychiatry stuff and reversing type 2 diabetes. But if we can't communicate this effectively, we're not even going to be able to get our foot in the door. So I thought this was an absolutely wonderful clip from an absolutely wonderful episode. Like I said, I really recommend going in and checking out episode 725 in its entirety. I've managed to stay married for over 7 years because I think I've understood this a little better. The fixing reflex. When somebody says they have an issue, my first instinct is to say, great, let me step in and fix the issue. Again, like my wife would come up with a problem and I'd want to step in. And it took a long time to realize, she doesn't want you to step in. She just wants to express that she's got a problem. You don't have to go in and fix everything. Just listen and validate. Tell us about the fixing reflex and how many of us with like the kindest intent doesn't really end up helping people very much.
Exactly. And it's so innate that we went into the profession of being coaches and healthcare providers and, committed life partners and parents to help. We want to help. It's a strong desire to help. It's actually a beautiful thing that we want to help and we want to make a difference. It's just sometimes we do it in a way that ends up stepping on people's boundaries or invoking the exact opposite psychological reaction than what we were trying to do. So we're actually sabotaging our own efforts and we're not actually helping the person that we wanted to help. So going with the example you raised about the HbA1c, let's say somebody walks in with a high HbA1c and I see their carbohydrate intake is 250 plus and I want it to be less than 100 and I see their proteins are down. One way for me to talk to them, because I have 5 minutes on the clock, my degree's on the wall, so we know who's the expert here. It's me, right? I'm the smart person, and you've come here to get my advice. So I'm going to tell you is cut your carbs and eat more protein, take these medicines, bye. and we just somehow think that this is actually going to change a whole person. Like you're going to actually achieve a full behavior change in a person in by doing that much. What eventually almost universally will happen is the minute you say that to someone, they're going to have to arch their spine and say, but wait, I have all these reasons why I need to be at this level. I need to be in the status quo. And it's because what you missed as the helper is this person took the appointment to come see you. They want to get better. They don't want to be sick. They're not wanting to be at 250 carbs and protein deficiency and ill health. They don't want any of that. They just don't know, or they haven't thought through. And this precious time with you might be the first chance that they've had in their hectic, crazy, busy life to come here and have some quiet time to think about diabetes for the first time in your presence. So they probably know, I'm probably eating in a way that's not helping my sugar, but I don't know what to do about it. I just haven't had time to think about it. It's overwhelming me. Or I probably know I should check my glucose more often or take my medications, but it doesn't happen. So they're already feeling that. And they also know that if they made these changes, they would get better. So there's like a seesaw, like there's opposite ends of what's happening inside their mind. And they've got this power struggle of me versus me. And you walk into the helper's office, the helper's like, oh, I'm here to fix you. I was born to fix people. And I'm going to tell you what you should do. And what I've done is, instead of this being an internal conflict of my ideas about status quo, my ideas about change, the helper has taken away the mic from me and is now talking about change. And well, if they're talking about change, all I have left to talk about is the status quo, because that side needs to be heard. Well, that backfires then, because now the helper is like, oh, this person's being stubborn. This person's not listening. This person's not interested. This person's not motivated. Oh, I'll give them less difficult or less intense HbA1c targets. Oops. That's very dangerous, because I pretty much created that reaction in the person by taking away their voice for change. So this is a coaching technique. This is a counseling or almost like, it's actually, before it's coaching or counseling, it's a listening technique. It's listening first. Are you listening to their needs or desires or reasons for change? Are we even engaging with their agenda? What is it that matters to them? And can we take a walk with them? And where would they like to go? And why would they like to go there? And is it okay if I offered some support or advice along the way? That's the fourth, it's not fixing them. We're taking permission. Would it be okay if I showed you how 250 grams of carb is affecting you versus the 80? But that's only once you've done the preparation of building that relationship where I see you, I respect you. I know you've got reasons for the status quo. I know you want to get better. So let's talk about what's going on.
That's so helpful. Your slides were incredible. I remember the seesaw kind of slides, and that was really helpful to kind of visualize, to understand this is just human nature. Like, we could be talking about anything, any kind of communication works this way. And one slide in particular really stood out to me was, you see people's really common, like, not excuses, like issues, like the gym is too far away. I don't work out often enough. It's too difficult. It's uncomfortable. I don't like it. And you see the response from the fixer is commonly like, oh, well, no pain, no gain, or like, well, you really need to dedicate more time to doing this. And you see the problem and then the response, and I can already feel internally inside myself like there's already resistance. And yet it's so easy for us as fixers to say those things and take those stands when it doesn't help. It causes that kind of resistance to pop up with people.
Yeah, for sure. And I really wanted to hold on to that particular slide. And I'm so glad it stuck with you, Casey, because that was what I was trying to show, because I knew that this topic means a lot to me and I've internalized it and it's my agenda to talk about it. But it wasn't even on anybody's radar until they heard about it that day. So for me to expect, same way that it's hallucination for me to think a patient's going to walk into my meeting and then just walk out fully transformed because of like 5 minutes of content from my mouth. Same way, it would be inappropriate for me to expect one talk and the whole audience is like just transformed, right? Permanently. It's not how it's going to work. So how do I break it down to meet them where they are as the audience, as the listeners? Is I know this is a big shift from where you might be, but do you see why you might be interested in it? And do you see how, if I show you how it's possible within a 5-minute interaction with the patient saying exactly those same example sentences, I think I had 7 or 8 of those, 7 or 8 different sentences mapped where this part stayed exactly the same. The only thing that changed was your response. And how do you think the energy is going to shift so that it becomes visible to you? It becomes possible, tangible, maybe worth learning for your own skills, because you've been there. You've been in the situation where you tried to fix somebody and you got resistance and it was draining, it was tiring, it was unpleasant, and you didn't feel like you made a difference. That's not what we're all getting for. We're trying to make a difference and help people. So maybe we were doing something to get in our own way. And I'm really glad that you saw that, because the idea was to make it manageable bite size.
Well, that stood out to everybody. I don't know if you remember how many questions you got afterwards that were like, how do I apply this? Why is this not being taught where I am? How can we incorporate this? You got so many questions about that. So people were very, very interested. And one of the ways I think about this is one of our former guests, Dr. Corey Jenks, he's done improv, which you've kind of talked about in the past. And he's talked about how important it is in improv and in medicine and in fixing people to not squash conversations, but to say yes and yes and yes and. I'm validating you. And like those combinations of words seem to be so important to validate people's responses and then help them come to the conclusions of whatever they want to do.
Exactly right. Is we don't want to be the one they're arguing with. And so going from yes, but energy to the yes, and that was the flip, is if you change how you show up, instead of being in a yes, but with your client, you're probably going to have a yes, and that moves the conversation one sentence forward. This patient is more likely to want to come back because they felt respected, they felt validated, and they felt heard, like you were saying with your wife. That's what we need. And there is that intrinsic wisdom within everybody. There's the wisdom within the patient to thrive. I knew there was tons of wisdom within that room to want to be that better healthcare provider for their patients. And that's the spark that we saw when people were coming up to the mic. It was that spark is, oh my gosh, how can I do more? Let's take this to the next step. Let's go one step forward. I'm feeling some confidence that I want to go ahead, instead of me showing up on the stage and insulting them. It's like, you guys don't know what to do. You guys are like hurting people and you're, trampling on their feet. I could have come with that accusatory fixing attitude towards my audience, right?
It would have gone a different direction for sure. Interesting.
They would have never called, no callbacks.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Of course, I've saved the best clip for last. This clip is taken from episode 694, titled Addressing the Roots of Pain and Restoring Movement with Bethany Ruff, my lovely wife. This episode was released on August 28th, 2024. On our website, you can always book a consultation with us, and I can get you in touch with her. If you are experiencing any kind of pain, she can definitely help people virtually, although she's much better at working with people one-on-one in person, which we do in the Salt Lake area of Utah. So if you're ever in the area and need her to address some of the pain that you're experiencing, I very much recommend her. Very biased in my opinion, but she does an amazing job, and I see people heal all the time. And of course, just hosting her on the show and educating us is always so wonderful. So this is the clip with my lovely wife, Bethany Ruff. I wanted to focus this conversation mostly around roster. I do have questions about Pilates as well, and in your work in particular. Over the years, I have drawn less and less and less lines between all of those different things. Like I don't ask as much, like, is your session with such and such, is it a roster session or Pilates session or personal training session? You seem to be able to flow with them in a really cool and interesting way, which I really like. But roster itself, you've already described it as similar to Rolfing, which is the best way that I typically describe it. Some people are at least a little bit familiar with that. But if somebody says, hey, I'm in pain, but I'm already seeing a chiropractor / physical therapist / corrective person, massage therapist is a big one. How do you differentiate yourself and these sessions in particular?
I think we all have a place in the space of body work, so I certainly don't want to talk down on any of the other practices. I find them to be very helpful as part of the entire recipe. But the first question I always ask someone when they seek me out is, what have those therapies done for you thus far? And a lot of people feel like they've been spinning their wheels. So just the last woman I got to meet found me from an ad, and she's been doing physical therapy. She absolutely hates massage because it hurts so bad. And I think all of our listeners could relate. We've probably all at least had one massage in our life where we are on the table, and for whatever reason, that heavy pressure, deep tissue, whatever they're doing, it hurts and our body's not relaxed. And we recognize that, but most of us don't say anything. And so the autonomy that comes with Rossiter, the flexibility, the hope that somebody gets, the ability to control the session, even though I'm the one stepping on you, you're the boss, and I'd say that every hour, you're the person who needs to communicate with me on the amount of pressure I give you, because the idea is not to just beat you up. We're not trying to leave you bruised and battered. We are really trying to get your nervous system to go more parasympathetic, which is rest, digest, and that's where healing happens. If your body's fighting it, if you're gritting your teeth, if you're just suffering through it, you're probably going to feel sore. And some people are convinced that that's what's making them feel better, or that's what the benefit is of them going. But I truly believe that the body needs to feel safe. Most of the time, physical pain, maybe it's manifesting because of a source of mental or emotional trauma. Maybe it's, you literally got hit by a car. But either way, the body doesn't know how to decipher that. Trauma is trauma, and it needs to feel safe in order to feel like it can unwind and unravel and move and change. So I usually ask people what they've been getting out of those therapies first, so I kind of know a little bit more about how they're going to respond to the work. I make sure that they understand that their role is to be a master communicator, because I'm a good Rossiter practitioner, but I'm a terrible mind reader. So I want that chatting throughout the session. As far as testing pain spots, the intention is not to come in and see me for a good time. We are trying to go straight for the source of pain, but it's not always where you think it's coming from. So the last woman I got to work with, she's had hip replacements, and she's been struggling with range of motion in her knee. Just watching her get out of her car it was a struggle for me. So we were chatting as we walk into the house, and what I'm hearing from her is that PT went straight to strengthening exercises. So if we think about taking a rubber band, and that's just a very simple way of thinking about a 10-set gritty model. If you pull that rubber band apart at both sides, that rubber band's really taut. And then what we know about strength training is, while it has all of the positive beneficial effects, it is still contracting. So we're expecting something that's tense to become tighter. And no wonder people leave with pain, and they're spinning their wheels, and they're doing more sessions and more sessions. So the way I try to explain to them is, we need to take that knot, we need to take that fascial adhesion or whatever is going on in their physical system, and we need to bring that to more of a baseline homeostatic level in order for the body to start to feel safe enough to unravel, unwind. And then after that, when we're consistently in a space where we have more internal space, that's the time that we want to start to learn how to stabilize and strengthen.
Gotcha. Okay, that's very interesting. I like how you said in the beginning of that explanation, like, we don't want to trash other modalities and say that, if you choose to do massage therapy or physical therapy or whatever, they're all tools, right? They can definitely help. I would say in my experience, for every time I got a massage, like whether or not it felt good while I was doing it, I always felt worse the next day. Like it never, especially long term, really helped any of the issues I was ever having. And I always kind of felt worse afterwards. Is that something you hear pretty frequently?
Yeah, and it's like I can see it in my brain. It's a tougher thing to explain to someone. But again, just taking that tensegrity model, a lot of people relate to like if we had a shoelace that's open on each end and you tie that shoelace in a nice tight knot in the middle, stretching, I mean, yoga in some cases, even when we haven't done soft tissue release, the body needs pressure. It needs pressure in order to unwind. So it's like taking that shoelace and pulling it from both ends, expecting the knot to get looser. We actually need to get into that knot. We need to figure out its trigger points, its connections. It might be a knee that's bugging, but the body does an amazing job of compensating so that you keep moving until it just cannot do it anymore. And pain is not a bad thing. It's information. And we have that initial pain pop up, whether it's a twinge when we get out of the chair or when we're walking, or it's a little harder to breathe, or it's soreness that just won't go away. And we ignore it. And then the body's like, okay, so we're just going to start to tighten somewhere else in another fascial sling in order to help this person to keep doing what they're doing because they're obviously not listening. It's not stopping. And then it snowballs to a bigger problem. So a lot of times when people come to see me, I'm not the first person that they've seen. They've already done the standard massage, chiropractic, physical therapy, the stuff that's been required by their insurance, and they're frustrated. So I have a big job cut out for me at that point because it might have started at the knee, but now what's overshadowing everything is the opposite side shoulder. And so we have to figure out how to reverse engineer, how did this person get into pain? And so we're testing different spots. We're seeing what kinds of releases are helping. And oftentimes it has nothing to do with what the area that they're coming in to see me for.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about that specifically. But before we do, when you said pressure and pressure points, the first thing my mind went to are tools like foam rollers or lacrosse balls, or even like we've seen in the last like 5-10 years, the rise of the guns that people kind of use on their body. How do you think about those as tools? Do you think they can be helpful, or are they in some way kind of like noise or distraction in a way?
I think those definitely have a place if they're used appropriately. I always tell people some amount of pressure is better than nothing. It's definitely, you're going to get a lot more out of it than just stretching alone. However, you need a destination for that tissue to go. So I think a lot of people who do self-myofascial release, one, relating it back to what I said about the trauma state and feeling safe. If a massage gun is beating the crap out of your IT band and you're tensed against it and you're holding your breath and you're just doing what your coach told you to do, that's not really going to make a long-term change. It's going to hurt like hell when you're doing it. You may feel like you're doing something positive, but it's the same idea as a deep tissue massage. So while it's still breaking things up, while lymph is being able to move more freely, while we're creating a stimulus in blood flow and oxygen exchange, I think the gold standard is a pin and stretch. So for example, when it comes to the iliotibial band, which is a really common area that people will foam roll and foam roll and foam roll, it doesn't seem to change. So what I coach my clients to do in between our sessions to maintain some level of space is to find the pain spot with an appropriate density foam roller, which is usually a lot softer than you typically find in a gym or where you want to go. And you find that pain spot and you get into a position where you're kind of laying on your side with one leg off the roller and you hold and you breathe. And that you might be there for 3 minutes. You might be there for 5 minutes. You might not get any amount of moving or stretching. You are holding and waiting for it to feel like it's desensitizing. Science says after about 2 minutes minimum, that's when the body starts to produce a chemical that I referred to earlier called hyaluronic acid. We've seen this in a lot of popular beauty and cosmetic products, but it's something that intrinsically is developed by the body, acting as oil between the fascial layer and the muscle. And there's not just a clear-cut separation, like 2 layers stacked on top of each other. Fascia is really interesting. In a live body, it could not be taken out. You can't extract it. It is within the muscle. It starts inside of the bone, and it's fluid. So it's always changing, and we need to allow heat and pressure at a certain amount of time to have that hyaluronin become more present in the body in order for things to start to slip and slide and glide better.
Okay.
So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically.
Okay.
So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think they're great tools. They just need to, it's user error typically. So I think
And that is just about going to do it for the 2024 episode where we took all of my favorite clips from this year of podcasting. A huge thanks again to all of our amazing guests, and a huge thank to you, our listeners. We can't thank you enough. I never envisioned that this project would be as wildly successful as it is and bring me such joy in my day-to-day life. Looking forward to a new year in 2025. 2024 was definitely a tough one. I have to say, a lot of people have had a lot of struggles, and definitely for me personally, it's been a really tough year. So looking for a fresh start in 2025. As we mentioned before the last clip, you can always go to our website, which is myboundlessbody.com. The first thing you will see on the website is a book now button where you can schedule a time to chat with us as a free session. We want to be able to, help understand your goals and give you some suggestions as we are starting out a new year, whether that is suggesting some different exercises to do, showing you things that you can be doing at home or whatever facility you train at, maybe just with a minimal amount of equipment. We can also talk about nutrition. January is World Carnivore Month, and so if you're curious about trying a carnivore diet, it might be a lot easier than you think, and we can help demystify that for you and give you some tips and tricks. We've taken many people through that at this point. But anyway, that resource is always available for you, again, at our website at myboundlessbody.com. That is a complimentary 30-minute coaching session that we can talk about anything that you would like to address and answer any questions you have about health and fitness, nutrition, exercise, all of it. So as always, thank you again so very much for listening to Boundless Body Radio. It's such a joy to bring you these episodes. We look forward to many more to come in the future, and cheers to 2025.